On a sun-drenched morning at Windsor, as the world waited for the smiling public faces of royalty, Princess Catherine made a private choice that would never appear in any official album. It was a decision whispered between a mother and her young son, a silent pact forged in love and understanding that would later ripple outwards, leaving millions who learned of it with tears in their eyes and a lump in their throat. This is not a story of crowns and ceremony, but of the quiet, powerful moment a princess chose being a mother above all else. The morning of Prince Louis's 6th birthday portrait session dawned with the soft, hopeful light that only an English spring morning can bring. At Windsor, the household was a gentle hum of activity, the kind carefully managed to feel calm on the surface. Down a sunlit corridor, in a room where toys were neatly tucked into woven baskets and the walls held framed children's drawings, Catherine, Princess of Wales, knelt on the carpet. Her son, Louis, a whirlwind of energy on any given day, was unusually still. He was dressed in a simple, comfortable shirt and shorts, his hair still damp from the bath. But his usually bright blue eyes were clouded, fixed on the pattern of the rug as he traced it with a finger. "What's going on in that busy mind of yours, Lou?" Catherine asked, her voice soft, barely above a whisper. She didn't reach for him, just stayed close, offering her presence like an anchor. Louis's lower lip trembled. "Do I have to smile today, Mummy?" he asked, the question so small and so heavy at the same time. "My face feels wobbly." It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't tiredness. It was the profound, unnameable weight a child sometimes feels, a shadow passing over the sun. Catherine knew this child, his fierce joy, his boundless silliness, but also his deep, sensitive core. Today, the world expected a beaming birthday boy. The photographers would arrive soon. The tradition was set, a charming, smiling portrait released to the public, a gesture of shared celebration. The entire machinery of public relations, the gentle expectations of a nation who adored this particular little prince's playful spirit, was in motion. Catherine looked at him, really looked. She saw the slight tension in his small shoulders, the way he held himself a little too carefully. A dozen practical thoughts flickered through her mind. The schedule, the kindly waiting photographer, the millions of well-wishers. But they were like leaves on a stream, floating past. What remained, solid and immovable, was the boy in front of her. In that quiet room, the crown of duty felt lighter than the sacred crown of motherhood. She made her decision. She reached out and smoothed his hair. "No, my love," she said, her words clear and certain. "You don't have to smile if you don't feel like it. Not for anyone." The relief that washed over Louis was instantaneous. His small body seemed to melt, the artificial stiffness gone. He leaned into her, burying his face in her shoulder for a long moment. There were no more words. The pact was sealed. Later, in the private gardens where dappled sunlight played through the oak leaves, the session proceeded not as a performance, but as a quiet observation. The photographer, briefed by Catherine with a few meaningful words, became a discreet shadow. Louis didn't perform. He explored. He looked at a ladybug on a blade of grass with a serious, studious expression. He sat on a weathered bench, kicking his legs gently, his gaze distant and thoughtful. Catherine was there, not as a director, but as a presence. In one frame, she was simply sitting beside him, her hand resting on his back, her own profile quiet and watchful. The love was not in forced grins, but in the proximity, the shared space, the acceptance of a mood. When the images were reviewed, the Palace Communications team felt a ripple of anxiety. None were the traditional grinning birthday shots. They were beautiful, artistically stunning even, but they were real. They showed a pensive little boy, a mother's supportive touch, a story of a non-perfect moment. Catherine was firm. "These are the ones," she said, her tone leaving no room for debate. She wrote the accompanying caption herself, something simple and from the heart, explaining that like all children, Louis had his days, and Today, they wanted to share a genuine moment from his 6th year. The release was scheduled for the following morning. As the digital files were prepared to go out to the world, Catherine felt a flutter of nerves. This was a departure, a softening of the royal facade she worked so diligently to uphold. That night, after reading Louis's story, a silly one that finally coaxed a genuine, sleepy giggle, she stood at her window. She wondered if people would understand, or if they would see only a somber child and assume unhappiness. She was staking a part of her philosophy, that even in a golden fishbowl, childhood must be allowed its authentic spectrum on a single set of photographs. The birthday portraits hit the public sphere just after breakfast. The first reaction across social media and news sites was a collective pause. Where's the big, gap-toothed grin? The mischievous sparkle the public had come to associate with Louis? Headlines were initially cautious. Pensive Prince Louis Mark's 6th birthday, a more subdued birthday portrait. But as people lingered on the images, something began to shift. Mothers and fathers saw not just a prince, but a child. They saw the familiar slump of a little boy feeling out of sorts. They saw the gentle, non-intrusive comfort in Catherine's touch. In an age of curated social media perfection, where even childhood is often presented as a cascade of gleeful, filter-heavy moments, these pictures were a quiet revolution. They were not perfect. They were true. The comment sections transformed. "Thank you, Catherine, for showing a real child, not a prop," wrote one parent. "This is the most beautiful royal photo I've ever seen. You can feel the love," said another. A child psychologist penned a thread praising the move as a masterclass in emotionally literate parenting. Stories began to pour in from people everywhere. A mother shared a picture of her own son on his birthday, also not smiling because he'd been overwhelmed. A father talked about the pressure to always make childhood look happy for the grandparents. Catherine's simple act had given permission to millions to acknowledge that childhood, indeed life, contains multitudes, that a sad moment is not a failing, but a human experience deserving of respect. The media tide turned decisively. Editorial pieces were written about the power of authenticity and the new royalty that Catherine was shaping, one of heartfelt connection over immaculate presentation. But for Catherine, reading the summaries of the global response in her office, the greatest feedback was private. It came in a letter from a bereavement counselor who explained she was using the photo to help children articulate feelings that weren't happy. It came in a message from a teacher who said her class had talked about feelings because of the Prince Louis pictures. The portrait had started a conversation far bigger than a birthday. A few days after the release, Catherine found a moment of quiet in the garden, the same spot where the photos were taken. She reflected on the whirlwind. The decision, made in that sunlit playroom, had been instinctual, a mother's compass overriding all else. She never intended to make a global statement, yet in doing the most fundamentally human thing, honoring her child's emotional truth, she had. It proved a powerful lesson, that in a world obsessed with image, the greatest impact often comes from gently setting the image aside. The public hadn't seen a princess performing duty. They'd seen a mother exercising profound love. And that was a language every single person, regardless of country or status, could understand and feel deeply. The story of that day became etched not as a minor footnote in royal history, but as a defining chapter in Catherine's public life. It was referenced in discussions about modern parenting and media, but its truest legacy was invisible to the public eye. It was in the strengthened bond between a mother and